The dust storm had been following Clara May for 3 days, like a yellow specter haunting the Wyoming territory. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she rode into Rawhide Pass, a town that seemed to exist purely out of spite against the unforgiving landscape. The mare beneath her wheezed with each step, its ribs showing through patches where the saddle had rubbed the coat raw. Clara's hands trembled as she tied the horse to the hitching post outside Mrs. Garrett's boarding house, not from the cold October wind that cut through the valley like a blade, but from the memory of blood on saloon floorboards, of her husband Jake's final curse before the bottle finally killed him, or rather, before the man he'd pulled a knife on had killed him in self-defense. 3 weeks had passed since that night, and still she could smell the whiskey and copper tang of death. The boarding house door creaked on rusted hinges. Mrs. Garrett appeared, a woman carved from the same unforgiving stone as the surrounding cliffs. Her gray hair pulled back so severely it stretched the corners of her eyes. "Clara May Hutchinson," the older woman said, not a question but a statement, as if she'd been expecting her. "Heard about Jake. Can't say I'm surprised." Clara nodded, unable to meet her eyes. In a town like Rawhide Pass, news traveled faster than wildfire through sagebrush. "Need work," Clara managed, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "Anything. I can cook, clean, mend." "Can you tend wounds?" "Mrs." Garrett interrupted, studying her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "There's a job, if you've got the stomach for it. Man up in the hills got himself shot up pretty bad. Need someone to look after him while he heals." Clara's empty stomach clenched. "How bad?" "Bad enough he's paying $20 for a week's care. That's more than you'd make in 2 months doing laundry." "Mrs." Garrett paused, her expression softening just a fraction. "Course he's difficult. Lives alone out past Devil's Canyon. Folks say he's not quite right since whatever happened to him out there. $20. Enough to get her to Denver. Maybe farther. Far enough that Jake's ghost couldn't follow." "I'll take it," Clara said. "Mrs." Garrett nodded, unsurprised. "You'll need supplies. The man, Elias Kane's his name, he won't have much. Take what you need from the general store. Tell Samuel to put it on Kane's account. He's good for it." She gestured toward the mountains. "Follow the old mining road past the canyon. When you see 3 dead pines struck by lightning, turn north. His cabin's another mile up the trail. Can't miss it. It's the only thing standing between here and hell." Clara spent her last coins on hardtack and dried beans, loading them into saddlebags alongside the medical supplies Samuel had grudgingly provided. The storekeeper had given her a look somewhere between pity and warning when she'd mentioned Kane's name. "You sure about this, Mrs. Hutchinson?" he'd asked, wrapping bandages in brown paper. "Elias Kane ain't like regular folk. Came here 2 winters back, half dead and looking like he'd wrestled the devil himself. Keeps to himself. Only comes to town when he absolutely has to. Last woman who went up there, the widow Martinez, she came back after 2 days. Wouldn't say why. Just said the man had demons." Everyone had demons, Clara thought. Some just wore theirs on the outside. The ride to Kane's cabin took most of the day. The landscape grew increasingly hostile as she climbed higher into the mountains. Red rock formations jutting from the earth like broken teeth. Scrub pine clinging desperately to cliff sides. And always the wind, howling through the canyons like the voices of the dead. She found the 3 lightning-struck pines just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. The trail north was barely visible, more game path than road, winding through stands of aspen that whispered secrets in the gathering dusk. The cabin appeared suddenly, a dark smudge against the tree line, built from rough-hewn logs chinked with mud. It looked like it had grown from the earth itself rather than been constructed by human hands. No smoke rose from the chimney. No light flickered in the single window. For a moment, Clara wondered if Kane had already died, if she'd ridden all this way to tend a corpse. Then the door opened. The man who filled the doorframe looked like he'd been carved from the same dark wood as his shelter, tall and lean, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor despite his obvious injury. His left arm was wrapped in blood-stained bandages from shoulder to wrist. Dark hair hung to his collar, unkempt and wild. But it was his eyes that made Clara's breath catch, gray as winter storm clouds and just as cold, holding a wariness that reminded her of a wolf backed into a corner. "You, the woman from town?" His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "Clara May Hutchinson, Mrs. Garrett sent me." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes taking in her travel-worn dress, her thin face, the way her hands clutched the reins like a lifeline. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, or perhaps he was simply too tired to care. "Come in then, before the cold kills us both." The cabin's interior was Spartan, a single room with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with a few provisions. A fireplace dominated one wall, cold and dark. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust except for the bed, where dark stains on the blankets told their own story. Kane moved stiffly to the table and lowered himself into a chair, his jaw tight with pain. In the fading light from the window, Clara could see the sheen of fever sweat on his forehead. "When were you shot?" she asked, setting down her supplies. 4 days ago, maybe 5. Hard to keep track." He didn't elaborate on how or why, and something in his tone warned her not to ask. Clara moved closer, professional instinct overriding her nervousness. "I need to see the wound." His laugh was bitter. "Thought that's what you were here for?" With visible effort, he unbuttoned his shirt one-handed, revealing a torso that made Clara's breath catch for an entirely different reason. Not because of the fresh bullet wound seeping through his bandages, though that was bad enough. It was the scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing his chest and disappearing beneath the bandages. Old wounds, some from blades, others from what could only be burns. A history of violence written in flesh. "The bullet?" she prompted, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Still in there. Couldn't dig it out myself, not with my left hand." He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something besides coldness there, a flicker of vulnerability quickly suppressed. "You done this before?" "My husband came home bleeding often enough," Clara said quietly. It wasn't quite the same, but she had cleaned knife wounds, set broken bones, stitched split skin. "I'll need hot water. And whiskey if you have it. Cabinet above the stove," Kane said. "Water's in the barrel outside." As Clara built a fire and set water to boil, she was acutely aware of Kane watching her, not with the hungry gaze she'd grown accustomed to from men, but with a sort of wary curiosity, like he was trying to figure out what kind of threat she might pose. "There are rules," he said suddenly. "You stay a week, no more. You don't ask questions about before. You don't go through my things. You do your job, take your money, and leave." "Understood?" "Understood," Clara replied, though she wondered what secrets warranted such strict boundaries. The next hour was spent in tense concentration. Clara had to cut away the old bandages, crusted with dried blood and pus. The wound was angry and inflamed. The bullet lodged deep in the muscle below his shoulder. Kane didn't make a sound as she worked, though his knuckles went white where he gripped the table edge. "This is going to hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over her knife. "Just do it." She'd helped Jake dig buckshot out of his leg once, but this was different. The bullet was deeper, the wound already starting to fester. Kane's breathing grew ragged as she probed, and twice she had to stop when her hands started shaking. Finally, the knife scraped against metal. "Almost there," she murmured, more to herself than him, when the bullet finally came free with a wet sound that made her stomach turn. Kane slumped forward, catching himself on the table. Fresh blood flowed freely, and Clara worked quickly to pack the wound with clean cloth. "You need stitches," she said. "I can. Tomorrow." His voice was thick with pain. "Just bandage it for now," as she wrapped fresh bandages around his chest. Clara couldn't help but notice more scars along his ribs, his back. One in particular caught her attention, a long, puckered line that ran from his shoulder blade down to his waist, old but clearly made by something sharp and deliberate. "Don't!" The word was sharp, and she realized she'd been staring. Kane pulled the remains of his shirt closed with his good hand. "Remember the rules." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "There's a cot in the corner. You can sleep there." He stood unsteadily, swaying slightly. I need to lie down." Clara watched him make his way to the bed, noting how he moved like a man expecting attack from any angle. Whatever had happened to Elias Kane, it had left marks far deeper than the scars on his skin. As she cleaned up the bloody supplies and prepared her own meager sleeping arrangements, she wondered if $20 was enough for whatever darkness lived in this cabin. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf answered. Clara pulled the thin blanket tighter around herself and tried not to think about how the sound reminded her of the look in Elias Kane's eyes, wild, wounded, and utterly alone. The first 3 days tested Clara's resolve more than any hardship she'd endured with Jake. The cabin's primitive conditions made even basic tasks a struggle. Water had to be hauled from a spring 50 yards through thick brush. The bucket heavy enough to make her arms ache. The cook stove, when it worked at all, belched black smoke that stung her eyes and left everything tasting of ash. Food supplies were meager, salt pork gone rancid at the edges, beans that took hours to soften, hardtack that could break teeth if not soaked first. Elias Kane proved an even greater challenge than his Spartan dwelling. He spoke only when absolutely necessary, usually single words or grunts of acknowledgement. During the day, he sat by the window with a rifle across his lap, staring out at the trail with an intensity that made Clara nervous. At night, he barely slept, pacing the cabin's small confines like a caged animal despite his injury. The second night, Clara woke to the sound of shouting. Kane thrashed in his bed, caught in the grip of some terrible dream. His words were mostly incoherent, but she caught fragments, names perhaps, places she didn't recognize. "Samuel," he called out, voice raw with anguish. "God, Samuel, I'm sorry. Should have been me. Should have—" She rose from her cot, uncertain whether to wake him. Before she could decide, his eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. His hand went immediately to the knife beside his bed. "It's just me," Clara said softly, keeping her distance. "You were dreaming." For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then awareness returned, and with it, a shame that flickered across his features before the usual mask of indifference slammed back into place. "Go back to sleep," he muttered, turning away. But Clara had seen the sheen of tears on his face, heard the grief in his voice. Whatever ghosts haunted Elias Kane, they gave him no peace. The wound, at least, was healing. Each morning and evening, Clara cleaned and redressed it, pleased to see the angry red inflammation gradually subside. Kane endured her ministrations in stone-faced silence, though she noticed how he tensed whenever her fingers brushed unmarked skin, as if even gentle touch was something foreign and suspicious. On the 4th day, while preparing the evening meal, Clara struggled with the stove's temperamental damper. Smoke billowed into the cabin, making her cough and her eyes stream. She didn't hear Kane approach until his hand reached past her to adjust the mechanism. "Like this," he said, showing her the trick to it. "Has to be just so, or it'll smoke you out." It was the most words he'd strung together since her arrival. Clara looked up at him, startled by the proximity. This close, she could see flecks of blue in his storm-gray eyes, could smell the sage and leather scent of him beneath the medicinal odor of his bandages. "Thank you," she managed. He stepped back quickly, as if suddenly aware of how close they stood. "You're doing it wrong. The beans, need to soak them overnight first." "I know how to cook beans," Clara said, a touch of irritation creeping into her voice. "Your stores were already half spoiled. I'm making do with what's here." "Then you should have—" He stopped, jaw working. "Never mind. No, please. Tell me what I should have done." The frustration of the past days boiled over. Should I have magically produced fresh supplies? Should I have somehow made this broken-down stove work properly from the start? I'm doing my best with what I have. Mr. Kane, if that's not good enough, it's fine." The words came out sharp. He turned away, but not before she saw something unexpected in his expression. Surprise, perhaps even a hint of respect. Just, "It's fine." That night, the temperature plummeted. Clara woke shivering, her thin blanket providing little protection against the mountain cold. She could see her breath in the moonlight streaming through the window. From his bed, she heard Kane's restless movements. Knew he was awake too. She rose quietly, intending to stoke the fire, but as she passed his bed, she noticed he'd kicked off his covers despite the cold. In the dim light, the scars on his exposed chest seemed to glow pale against his skin. One in particular drew her attention, a long, brutal mark that ran from his shoulder blade across to his ribs. Too deliberate to be from any accident. Before she could stop herself, her fingers moved toward it, drawn by some mixture of curiosity and unexpected compassion. The moment her fingertips made contact, his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist in an iron grip. "Don't." His voice was low. "Dangerous." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, heart hammering. "I didn't mean. The blanket was off, and I thought—" His grip loosened but didn't release. In the moonlight, his eyes held hers, and she saw not anger but something rawer, fear, perhaps, or a vulnerability so deep it might as well be a wound. "Why?" he asked, so quietly she almost missed it. "Why would you—" Clara didn't understand the question, but she answered instinctively. "Everyone deserves gentleness. Mr. Kane, even, especially, those who've known too little of it." He released her wrist as if it burned. "Go back to bed, Mrs. Hutchinson." But the next morning, she found he'd left his own thick blanket folded at the foot of her cot. The days developed a rhythm. Clara learned to work around Kane's moods and silences, while he seemed to gradually accept her presence as something less than a threat. He still watched the trail with paranoid intensity, still jumped at unexpected sounds, but occasionally she caught him observing her with something almost like curiosity. One afternoon, while she mended a torn shirt, one of many tasks she'd taken upon herself, he surprised her by speaking unprompted. "You're not from around here." Clara looked up from her sewing. "Neither are you. Your accent, Virginia, maybe, or the Carolinas." His jaw tightened. "Missouri, long time ago." Before she could respond, he changed the subject. "Where's your husband?" "Dead." The word came out flat. 3 weeks now. "Sorry for your loss." Clara laughed, a bitter sound she immediately regretted. "Don't be. Jake Hutchinson was a mean drunk who'd have killed me eventually if someone hadn't killed him first." She expected judgment, perhaps disgust. Instead, Kane nodded slowly. "Some men aren't worth mourning." "Did you know him?" "No, but I've known his type." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "That why you're out here, running? A widow needs work. This paid well." "That all?" Clara set down her sewing, meeting his gaze steadily. "We agreed. No questions about before." The ghost of what might have been a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." That evening, while Clara prepared their simple meal, Kane did something unprecedented. He helped, moving stiffly, favoring his wounded shoulder. He showed her where he kept a cache of preserved vegetables, even produced a small tin of peaches he'd been saving. "For what?" Clara asked, touched by the gesture. He shrugged with his good shoulder. "Maybe for when someone finally made proper beans." It was the closest thing to humor she'd heard from him. They ate in companionable silence, and for the first time the cabin felt less like a prison and more like a shelter. Later, as Clara cleaned the dishes in water heated on the stove, Kane spoke from his chair by the window. There might be trouble coming. Clara's hands stilled. What kind of trouble? The kind that carries guns. He didn't turn from the window. "Men have been tracking through the lower valley, saw their fires 2 nights ago. Could be nothing, could be hunters or travelers. But if anyone comes here, you get inside and stay down. Understand? Who are they? What do they want? Does it matter?" His voice hardened. "Just do as I say." Clara wanted to press, but something in his tone warned against it. "Instead," she asked, "is that why you watch the trail? You're expecting someone." "I'm always expecting someone." He finally turned to look at her, and his expression made her breath catch. "That's how you stay alive out here, Mrs. Hutchinson. You expect the worst and you're never disappointed." That night, Clara lay awake thinking about the sadness in his voice, the weight he carried in those scarred shoulders. She thought about the way he'd said Missouri like it hurt him, about the names he called in his sleep. Most of all, she thought about the fear she'd seen in his eyes when she'd touched that scar, not fear of her, but fear of being touched at all, as if gentleness itself was the enemy. The next morning, Kane announced he was teaching her to shoot. "I don't need," Clara began. "Yes, you do." He was already checking his rifle, movements efficient despite his injury. Woman alone out here needs to know how to defend herself, even if that woman's leaving in 3 days. The reminder of her impending departure sat strangely in Clara's chest. She followed him outside, where he'd set up targets, tin cans balanced on a fallen log 30 yards away. Ever fired a gun before? No. Jake had never let her near his weapons, said women had no business with guns. Kane showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger. His hands guided hers, and Clara was acutely aware of his presence behind her, solid and warm despite the cool morning air. "Breathe," he instructed. "Let half out, then squeeze gentle-like." The rifle kicked against her shoulder, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. The tin can remained untouched. Again, they spent an hour in patient practice. Kane never raised his voice, never showed frustration at her repeated misses. When she finally sent a can spinning, he nodded approval. "Natural steady hands," he said. "Few more days of practice. You'd be a fair shot." "Few more days," Clara repeated. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Neither of them mentioned that she had only 3 days left. As they walked back to the cabin, Clara noticed Kane favoring his wounded shoulder more than usual. "You've overdone it. Let me check your bandages." "I'm fine." "Don't be stubborn." Pot calling the kettle black, "Mrs. Hutchinson." But he sat and let her examine the wound. The exertion had started it seeping again, though not badly. As she worked, Clara was conscious of how familiar this had become, the routine of caring for him, the scent of his skin, the pattern of his breathing. "There," she said, securing the fresh bandage. "Try not to undo my work again." As she turned away, his hand caught hers, not grabbing this time, just a gentle touch that made her freeze. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Thank you. It's what you're paying me for." "No." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Not just for this." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then he released her hand and turned away, walls rebuilding themselves almost visibly. That night, the wolves came closer than ever. Clara could hear them prowling around the cabin, their howls raising the hair on her neck. Kane sat by the door with his rifle, tension radiating from every line of his body. "They won't come in," he said, perhaps sensing her fear. "Just hungry. Game's been scarce this year." "Does anything ever scare you?" Clara asked. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Everything scares me. Mrs. Hutchinson. Every sound, every shadow, every stranger on the trail. Fear's what keeps you breathing out here. It's when you stop being scared that you stop being careful. And when you stop being careful..." He trailed off, lost in some memory she couldn't share. Clara moved closer to the fire, but found herself thinking it wasn't the wolves outside that frightened her anymore. It was the growing certainty that in 3 days, she'd have to leave this place, and the damaged man who'd somehow begun to matter to her more than he should. The truth came spilling out of Clara on her 5th night, unexpected as spring rain in the desert. They'd been sitting by the fire after supper, a comfortable silence between them that had become their evening ritual. Kane was cleaning his rifle with methodical precision while Clara darned a hole in her last good stockings. Perhaps it was the whiskey he'd poured them both. For the cold, he'd said, or perhaps it was the way the firelight softened the harsh lines of his face. But suddenly she found herself talking. "Jake used to lock me in the horse stall when he was drunk," she said, the words dropping into the quiet like stones into still water. "Said it was where I belonged, with the other dumb animals, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight, even in winter." Kane's hands stilled on the rifle, but he didn't look up, didn't speak. Somehow his silence made it easier to continue. "The first time, I fought, screamed and pounded on the door until my hands bled." He just laughed, said no one would come, and he was right. Everyone in town knew what Jake Hutchinson was, but a man's wife is his property to do with as he pleases. Clara's needle trembled in her hands. "So, I learned to stop fighting. Learned to make myself small and quiet and hope he'd drink himself unconscious before he remembered I existed." "How long?" Kane's voice was barely above a whisper. 7 years. Clara set down her sewing, unable to continue with shaking hands. 7 years of bruises hidden under long sleeves, of lying to the doctor about how clumsy I was, of neighbors who looked the other way. I thought about ending it. More than once. Had it all planned out, Jake's straight razor was sharp enough, but each time, something held me back. Stubborn hope, maybe, or just cowardice. Not cowardice. Kane said firmly. "Never that. When I heard he was dead, killed in that bar fight, I felt—" Clara paused, searching for words. "Free. For the first time in 7 years, I could breathe. Is that terrible? To be glad your husband's dead?" "No." The word came out fierce, and when Clara looked up, she found Kane watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. Some men deserve what they get, and some women deserve better than what they're given. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with the promise of storms. Kane seemed withdrawn, barely touching his breakfast. Clara wondered if her confession had changed something between them, if she'd revealed too much of her shameful past. But when she rose to clear the dishes, he spoke. "I need to check the roof before the rain comes. Storm damage from last month. Your shoulder is healed enough." He was already pulling on his coat. "But I could use help, if you're willing." They worked in companionable silence, Clara handing up wooden shakes while Kane nailed them in place. The physical labor felt good after days of confinement in the cabin. When the first fat raindrops began to fall, they were only half finished. "Leave it," Clara called up. "You'll slip." But Kane was already scrambling down, and in his haste, his foot caught on a loose board. He fell the last few feet, landing hard with a curse. Clara rushed to help him up, and they stumbled toward the cabin as the sky opened in earnest. They burst through the door, soaked and breathless. Kane was laughing, actually laughing, a rusty sound as if he'd forgotten how. Clara found herself laughing too, giddy with cold and rain and the strange lightness of the moment. "Look at us," she gasped. "Like drowned rats." "Speak for yourself," Kane said, shaking water from his hair like a dog. "I look dignified." "Oh yes, very dignified." Clara pulled off her sodden shawl. "A dignified drowned rat." Their eyes met, and the laughter faded into something else. Clara became aware of how her wet dress clung to her, of the way Kane's shirt plastered to his chest, revealing the contours of muscle and scar beneath. The air between them crackled with more than cold. Kane looked away first. You should get into dry clothes before you catch your death." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She retreated behind the blanket she'd strung up for privacy, peeling off her wet things with trembling fingers. Through the thin barrier, she could hear Kane moving about, stoking the fire, setting water to heat. When she emerged in her spare dress, patched and faded but dry, she found he'd made coffee and set out the last of the peaches, a peace offering, perhaps, or something more. They sat by the fire as the storm raged outside, wind howling through the canyon like a living thing. The cabin, which had felt like a prison that first night, now seemed a sanctuary against the wild world beyond its walls. "Tell me something," Clara said suddenly, Something good, before everything that brought you here. Kane stared into his coffee for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I had a brother, Samuel, 3 years younger, smart as a whip. He wanted to be a teacher. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Used to practice on me, making me sit still while he explained things from his books. History, mathematics, philosophy even. Patience of a saint. That boy, especially given I was more interested in horses and guns than learning. What happened to him? Clara asked gently. The smile vanished. What happens to most good people in bad situations? He died. Kane's knuckles whitened around his cup. Because of me. Because of choices I made. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't kill him. The bitterness in his voice could have curdled milk. That honor belongs to me alone. Clara reached across the small space between them, covering his hand with hers. He flinched, but didn't pull away. We all carry our dead, she said quietly. Doesn't mean we have to bury ourselves with them. Kane turned his hand palm up, fingers closing around hers. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm, the small scars from years of rough work and rougher treatment. You're stronger than you look. Clara May. So are you. Elias. Something shifted in his expression at the use of his given name. He drew her closer, and she went willingly, heart hammering against her ribs. When his lips met hers, gentle despite the intensity in his eyes, Clara felt something inside her crack open, all the loneliness and fear and desperate hope she'd carried for so long spilling out like water from a broken dam. The kiss deepened, tentative exploration becoming something hungrier. Kane's hand tangled in her still damp hair while Clara gripped his shirt, anchoring herself against the tide of sensation. He tasted of coffee and whiskey and something wild, like the storm outside had gotten into him somehow, when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Kane rested his forehead against hers. I'm no good for you, he whispered. I'm broken, Clara, in ways that won't ever heal. Then we match, she whispered back. Two broken people might make something whole. He kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she couldn't say why, perhaps for all the tenderness she'd never known. All the gentle touches Jake had replaced with violence, perhaps for the man holding her now, so careful despite his own wounds. They sat together as the storm spent itself, trading kisses and quiet words. Kane told her fragments, about growing up in Missouri, about his father's farm, about learning to shoot to protect the livestock from wolves. Nothing about how he'd ended up here, scarred and hunted. But Clara didn't press. There would be time for those stories. Or so she let herself believe. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they lay down together on his narrow bed, fully clothed but pressed close. Clara traced the lines of his face in the dying firelight, memorizing each angle and shadow. 2 more days. Kane murmured against her hair. Don't, Clara said. Not tonight. He pulled her closer, and she felt the tremor that ran through him. For all his strength, all his dangerous edges, in that moment he seemed as fragile as spun glass. They woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of approaching horses. Kane was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand before Clara had fully opened her eyes. His whole body had gone taut. Predator alert. Get dressed, he ordered, already at the window. Stay away from the walls. Elias, now. Clara. The urgency in his voice sent her scrambling. She'd barely gotten her boots laced when a voice called from outside. Hello, the cabin? Looking for Elias Kane. Kane's jaw tightened. How many? Clara peered carefully through a gap in the wall, chinking. 3 men, armed. Recognize any of them? She looked again, then shook her head. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-eyed, the kind who made their living in ways best not examined too closely. Mr. Kane, the voice called again. We know you're in there. Just want to talk is all. About that business down in Cedar Junction. Never heard of any business in Cedar Junction. Kane called back. Now, that's funny. Man there says different. Says Elias Kane knows all about what happened to the Garrett family. Says Kane might even know where to find what was taken from their place before it burned. Clara saw Kane's knuckles go white on the rifle stock. The Garrett family. Why did that name sound? Mrs. Garrett, the boarding house owner who'd sent her here? You go to hell, Kane said flatly. Well now, that's not very friendly. And here we rode all this way to have a civilized conversation. The speaker's voice hardened. Tell you what, Kane, you come out peaceful like. We'll make it quick. Otherwise, well, hope you said goodbye to that pretty little woman we saw riding up here a few days back. Clara's blood turned to ice. Kane glanced at her, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. But also something else. Determination. The kind that got men killed. Give me an hour, Kane called. Let me get my affairs in order. 30 minutes, then we come in. Kane moved away from the window, pulling Clara with him to the far corner of the cabin. There's a deer trail out back, he whispered urgently. Leads down to a creek bed. Follow it east to... I'm not leaving you. Clara. No. She gripped his arms. Whatever this is, whoever you really are, I'm not running. Not again. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her close, kissing her with desperate intensity. Stubborn woman, he muttered against her lips. Pot calling the kettle black, she whispered back, echoing his words from days before. Kane showed her where he kept extra ammunition, had her load his spare pistol. His hands were steady as he prepared, but Clara could see the weight settling on his shoulders. Not fear, but resignation. Whatever happens, he said, checking the rifle one last time. Whatever you hear about me after this, I don't care. And Clara found, with some surprise, that she meant it. I know who you are now. That's what matters. He touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. No, you don't, but thank you for these days, for making me remember what it feels like to be human. Before Clara could respond, he was moving toward the door. She grabbed the pistol and followed, heart pounding but resolve firm. She'd spent 7 years being afraid, no more. The morning sun was brilliant after the storm, making the wet earth steam. The 3 men sat their horses in a loose semicircle, rifles across their saddles. They had the patient look of hunters who knew their prey was cornered. Elias Kane, the leader said, touching his hat brim in mock courtesy. Been a long time. You're looking well for a dead man. Apparently not dead enough, Kane replied. No, sir, not near dead enough for what you done. The man's eyes flicked to Clara. Ma'am, you might want to step aside. This ain't no business for a lady. I'm staying, Clara said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The leader shrugged. Your funeral, then. He focused back on Kane. You gonna come quiet, or do we do this the hard way? I told you, Kane said. I don't know anything about Cedar Junction or the Garretts. See now, that's disappointing, because Tom Garrett, Mrs. Garrett's only living son. He says different. Says a man matching your description was seen leaving their homestead right before it went up in flames, along with his parents and sister inside. Clara felt the world tilt. Mrs. Garrett's family. Burned alive? And Elias? That's a lie, Kane said. But Clara heard something in his voice. Not denial of involvement, but of guilt. Maybe so, but Tom's willing to pay good money to have a conversation about it. And dead or alive, you're coming with us. What happened next would replay in Clara's memory in fragments. Kane shoving her behind the water barrel. The crack of rifles. Splinters exploding from the cabin wall, inches from her head. She heard Kane's rifle answer. Saw one of the riders topple from his saddle. Then pain exploded through her shoulder, spinning her to the ground. She heard Elias roar her name. Heard more shots. Closer now. When she managed to focus through the pain, Kane was kneeling beside her, his hands pressed to her shoulder. His shirt was soaked with red, though she couldn't tell if it was her blood or his. Damn stubborn woman, he was saying over and over. Why didn't you run? Pot, Clara managed through gritted teeth. Kettle. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Then his expression hardened as he looked beyond her. Clara turned her head to see the remaining riders approaching, weapons trained on them. "Throw down the guns. Kane," the leader ordered. "It's over." Kane's hand found Clara's, squeezing gently. She saw him calculate odds, distances, chances, and saw the moment he accepted defeat. Slowly, he laid down his rifle. "Let her go," he said. "She's nothing to do with this. Seems to me she picked her side." The leader dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on Kane. "Tom wants you alive if possible, but he weren't particular about condition. As for the woman," the sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever threat he'd been about to make. "A lot of horses, by the sound of it?" The leader's head whipped around, and Clara saw alarm flash across his features. "Garrison!" a new voice bellowed. "Federal Marshal, drop your weapons!" What followed was chaos. The bounty hunters tried to run. More shots were fired. Men shouted orders and curses. Through it all, Kane shielded Clara with his body, pressing her into the muddy ground as lead whistled overhead. When the shooting finally stopped, a man in a badge knelt beside them. "Miss, are you hurt?" "She's shot," Kane answered for her. "Needs a doctor. We'll see to it." The marshal studied Kane with sharp eyes. "Elias Kane?" "Yes, also known as Josiah Kane." Kane's jaw tightened. "Once, Mr. Kane, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Marcus Garrett. You have the right to—" "He didn't do it!" Clara's voice was weak but fierce. "Whatever happened, he didn't kill those people." The marshal's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, I appreciate your loyalty, but she doesn't know anything about it." Kane interrupted. "I hired her to tend wounds, nothing more. She's innocent." "Liar?" Clara whispered. Kane looked down at her, and she saw everything in his eyes. Love, regret, farewell. "Take care of her," he told the marshal. "Please." As consciousness faded, Clara heard them taking him away, heard the clink of shackles and the creak of leather. Her last coherent thought was absurd but fierce. She'd just found him, this wounded, scarred, impossibly gentle man. She'd be damned if she'd lose him now. 2 days was not nearly enough. But then, Clara was learning. It never was. Clara woke to white walls and the sharp smell of carbolic acid. The infirmary in Rawhide Pass was little more than a room behind the barber shop, but Doc Holsworth kept it clean. Her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, wrapped tight in fresh bandages. "Easy now," the doctor said as she tried to sit up. "You lost a fair amount of blood. Mrs. Hutchinson, that bullet went clean through, which is lucky, but you need rest." "Where is he?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Where's Elias?" Doc Holsworth's expression told her everything. "The marshal took him to the county seat for holding. Trial's set for next week. I need to see him. What you need is to lie still and heal. That man's troubles aren't yours to carry." But Clara was already pushing herself upright, ignoring the wave of dizziness. "How far to the county seat?" 2 days' ride, which you're in no condition to make." The doctor sighed. "Mrs. Hutchinson, I treated your injuries when your husband was alive. I know you've been through enough. Why throw your lot in with another violent man? He's nothing like Jake." The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. "You don't know him. I know he's wanted for murder. I know 3 men died trying to bring him in. And you nearly joined them." Doc Holsworth gentled his tone. "Whatever you think you felt up there in that cabin, it wasn't real. Isolation and danger. They can make people see things that aren't there." Clara thought of Elias's hands, so careful as he showed her how to shoot. His broken laugh in the rain. The way he'd said her name like a prayer as her blood soaked his shirt. If that wasn't real, nothing was. She waited until the doctor left. Then slowly, painfully, got dressed. Her left arm was nearly useless, but she managed. The $20 Elias had paid her in advance was still in her coat pocket, enough to buy supplies and rent a horse. The ride to the county seat was agony. Each jolt sent fire through her shoulder, and twice she had to stop to rest, clinging to the saddle horn as black spots danced in her vision. But she pressed on. driven by a urgency she couldn't name. The town of Millfield was larger than Rawhide Pass, boasting a proper courthouse and a brick jail. Clara tied her horse and walked unsteadily to the marshal's office, ignoring the stares her blood-stained dress attracted. Marshal William Thorne was a lean man with intelligent eyes and prematurely gray hair. He looked up from his paperwork as Clara entered, leaning heavily on the doorframe. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out of bed. I need to see Elias Kane. Josiah Kane. Whatever you're calling him. That's not possible. He's being held pending trial. No visitors except his attorney." The marshal studied her. "You're the woman from the cabin, the one who got shot." "Yes." "Then you should know Mr. Kane specifically asked that you not be allowed to see him. Said it would be better for you to forget you ever met him." Clara laughed bitterly. "Of course he did. The noble fool." She sank into the chair across from the marshal's desk, exhaustion making her bold. "Tell me what he's really accused of. Not the bounty hunter's version, the truth." Marshal Thorne considered her for a long moment. "Why do you care? By all accounts, you knew him less than a week. Sometimes a week is enough." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Please." The marshal sighed, then pulled out a file. 2 years ago, a homestead near Cedar Junction, Missouri, burned to the ground. Marcus and Elizabeth Garrett died in the fire, along with their 17-year-old daughter, Rebecca. Their son Tom was away at the time. Came back to find his family dead and his inheritance gone. His father kept considerable cash hidden on the property. "And you think Elias did this?" A man matching his description was seen leaving the property shortly before the fire was discovered. Tom Garrett identified him from wanted posters. Seems Mr. Kane had quite a reputation in Missouri. Ran with the Colton gang for a time, though he'd gone straight for a while before the fire. Clara's heart sank. The Colton gang was known even out here. Bank robbers and killers who'd terrorized Missouri for years before most were hanged or shot. But you said he'd gone straight? For about 2 years, yes. Had a small ranch, kept to himself. Some say he was trying to atone for past sins. The marshal shrugged. Then the Garretts died, and Kane disappeared. Been running ever since. Has anyone asked him what happened? He won't talk about it, won't confirm or deny anything. Just sits in that cell like he's already accepted the noose. Clara stood, swaying slightly. "I need to see him." "Ma'am, he didn't do it." She gripped the edge of the desk. "I don't know what happened at that homestead, but I know him. He's not a killer. Not like that. With respect, you know the man he showed you for a few days. I've got a file full of testimonies about who Josiah Kane really is. Then let me see those testimonies. Let me understand." Marshal Thorne studied her for a long moment, then pushed the file across the desk. "Read it if you want. Won't change anything. Trial's in 6 days. And Tom Garrett's bringing half the county as witnesses. Your Mr. Kane doesn't stand a chance." Clara took the file with trembling hands. "We'll see about that." She spent the rest of the day in the boarding house, reading through every document, every witness statement, every scrap of information about Josiah Kane's past. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd lost his way young. Father dead. Mother remarried to a brutal man who'd driven Josiah to run away at 15. He'd fallen in with the Colton gang more out of desperation than evil, starting as a horse holder and working his way up to participant in robberies. But there were other stories too. How he'd refused to shoot a bank guard who was just a kid himself. How he'd used his share of one robbery to pay off a widow's mortgage. How he'd walked away from the gang after a job went bad and innocent people died, earning him a death sentence from his former associates. The story of the Garrett fire was murkier. Yes, Josiah had been seen in the area. Yes, he'd had dealings with Marcus Garrett, who'd been trying to buy Josiah's ranch for less than it was worth. But the witness who'd placed him at the scene was a known drunk, and the timing didn't quite add up. More interesting was what Clara found between the lines. Rebecca Garrett had been seeing someone in secret, according to her friends. Her father had been violently opposed, had locked her in a room, had threatened to send her to a convent. The night of the fire, Tom had been 20 miles away at a poker game, verified by multiple witnesses who all happened to owe him money. As night fell, Clara made her decision. She couldn't prove Elias innocent, but she could make sure his side of the story was heard. She just needed to convince him to tell it. The next morning, she dressed in her cleanest clothes, pinned her hair severely back, and marched to the jail with as much dignity as her wounded shoulder allowed. "I'm his wife," she told the deputy on duty, lying through her teeth. "We were married by circuit preacher 3 weeks ago. I have a right to see my husband." The deputy, barely old enough to shave, looked uncertain. "Marshal Thorne said no visitors. The marshal said no visitors except family and legal counsel." Clara let tears come to her eyes, not difficult given the pain in her shoulder. "Please, they're going to hang him. At least let me say goodbye." The boy wavered, then nodded. 10 minutes, that's all." The cells were in the basement, damp and cold despite the autumn sun outside. Elias sat on a narrow bunk, head in his hands. He looked up at the sound of footsteps, and his expression when he saw her was worth every mile of painful travel. "Clara." He was at the bars in 2 strides. "What are you doing here? You should be resting, healing, forgetting you exist." She reached through the bars to touch his face. "I'm not good at following orders." "Damn it, woman." But his hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "You have to leave, today. Get as far from here as you can. Not without you. Clara, listen to me." She lowered her voice. "I've been reading the files. I know about the Coltons, about your past. I don't care, but I also know there's more to the Garrett fire than Tom's version. Tell me what really happened." Elias pulled away, turning his back to her. "It doesn't matter. It does to me." "Why?" He spun to face her, eyes blazing. "Why do you care what happens to me? You don't know me. Clara, you know a week's worth of pretense, of me trying to be something I'm not. I know you have nightmares about someone named Samuel. I know you can't bear to be touched unexpectedly, but you're starved for gentleness. I know you were teaching me to shoot not for protection, but because you wanted me to feel powerful." Clara gripped the bars. "I know you would have died before letting those men hurt me. That's not pretense. Elias, that's who you are." He stared at her, and she saw his walls crumbling. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Rebecca Garrett was 17. Marcus he wasn't a good man. Used his fists on his wife, probably worse on his daughter. She started coming to me for help, just to talk at first. Then, he swallowed hard. I told her no. Told her she was too young, too innocent for someone like me. But she kept coming back, and I was weak, lonely. I let myself believe it could work. Clara's heart ached for him, for the girl, for the whole tragic mess. The night of the fire, she was going to run away with me. Had it all planned, but Tom found out somehow. Told their father. Marcus went crazy, said he'd kill her before he'd let her go with trash like me. Elias's hands clenched. I went to the house to reason with him, just to talk. But when I got there, the fire had already started. Clara guessed. The whole place was ablaze. I could hear screaming inside. I tried to get in, tried so hard. But the heat. He held up his hands. And for the first time, Clara noticed the old burn scars on his palms. I couldn't save them. Any of them. Then why run? Why not tell the truth? Because Tom Garrett needed someone to blame. And I was convenient. A former outlaw who'd corrupted his sister? Perfect villain. Elias laughed bitterly. Besides, maybe it was my fault. If I'd stayed away from her, been stronger. Stop! Clara reached through the bars again, catching his hands. You loved her? That's not a crime. In her father's house. It was... He looked at their joined hands. After she died. I didn't much care what happened to me. Ran because it was easier than facing a rope. But I've been dead inside for 2 years. Until a stubborn widow showed up at my door and reminded me what it felt like to want to live. Clara felt tears on her cheeks. Then fight. Tell your story. Make them see— See what? That I'm innocent of murder but guilty of plenty else? That I loved a girl I had no right to touch? That I failed to save her? He shook his head. Tom Garrett wants blood for blood. Mine's as good as any. Not to me. The deputy's footsteps echoed on the stairs. Time's up, ma'am. Clara pressed closer to the bars. I'm not giving up on you. You should. But Elias leaned down, kissing her through the iron barrier. Be happy, Clara. Find someone whole to love. I already have, she whispered, as the deputy escorted her out. Clara's mind was racing. The truth wouldn't be enough. Not with Tom Garrett's money and influence stacked against a former outlaw. She needed proof. Or, failing that, she needed a miracle. What she got was something in between. That evening, as Clara sat in her boarding room trying to compose a letter to any lawyer who might take Elias's case, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find a woman in a dark veil, clearly nervous. Mrs. Hutchinson, I was a friend of Rebecca Garrett's. I heard you've been asking questions. Clara's pulse quickened. Please, come in. The woman, barely more than a girl herself, perched on the edge of a chair like she might flee at any moment. When she lifted her veil, Clara saw she'd been crying. My name is Mary Sullivan. Rebecca was my closest friend. I know what really happened that night. Tell me, Clara urged gently. Tom started the fire. The words came out in a rush. He was drunk, angry about losing at cards again. Came home raging about Rebecca disgracing the family, about the money their father was going to give her for a dowry instead of paying Tom's gambling debts. Mary twisted her handkerchief. I was hiding in the garden. Saw him go in with a lamp, heard him yelling, then I saw smoke, and Tom running out the back. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Why didn't you speak up before? Mary's laugh was bitter. Who'd believe me over Tom Garrett? Besides, he made it clear what would happen to my family if I talked. My father works at his mill. But you're talking now. Because they're going to hang an innocent man. Because Rebecca loved him. And she'd haunt me forever if I let him die for Tom's crime. Mary stood. I'll testify, if you can guarantee my family's safety. Clara thought quickly. Marshal Thorne seems like an honest man. If we go to him together, tell him everything. Tom has a lot of friends, a lot of influence. Then we'll need more than just your testimony. Clara stood, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. We'll need to make Tom think he's already lost. It was a desperate plan, but Clara had learned something in her week with Elias. Sometimes desperate was all you had, and sometimes it was enough. The morning of the trial dawned cold and gray, matching Clara's mood as she dressed carefully in her best dress, the black one she'd worn to Jake's funeral. Her shoulder still ached, but she barely noticed it beneath the weight of what lay ahead. Mary Sullivan had agreed to testify, but Clara knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against Tom Garrett's money and influence, not against the prejudice facing a former outlaw. She needed Tom to reveal himself, and she thought she knew how. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread about the infamous Josiah Kane finally facing justice, and folks had come from 3 counties to watch. Clara pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers that followed her. The woman who'd taken up with a killer, the widow who couldn't pick a decent man. Elias sat at the defendant's table looking gaunt but composed, his court-appointed lawyer beside him, a nervous young man who'd barely passed the bar. When Elias saw Clara in the gallery, something flickered in his eyes before he looked away. Tom Garrett sat in the front row, playing the grieving son to perfection, well-dressed, clean-shaven, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief when anyone looked his way. But Clara had seen him studying the crowd, calculating who was there and what they were worth to him. Judge Harrison called the court to order, and the prosecutor began laying out the case. It was damning. Even Clara had to admit. Elias's past with the Colton gang, his presence near the Garrett homestead, his flight after the fire. The drunk witness swore he'd seen that Kane fellow leaving just as the flames started. Tom Garrett took the stand to paint a picture of his sister as innocent and pure, corrupted by a dangerous man. He pursued her relentlessly, Tom said, voice breaking. Poor Rebecca was too young, too naive to see him for what he was. When father tried to protect her, to keep her safe, he covered his face. That monster killed them all rather than let her go. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was calculated, every gesture performed. But she waited, biding her time. The defense was pitiful. Elias's lawyer stumbled through cross-examinations, failed to challenge obvious inconsistencies. When it came time to present Elias's side, the young man called no witnesses, offered no evidence, just a weak plea for mercy based on lack of direct proof. "Is that all?" Judge Harrison asked, looking disgusted. "Your Honor." Clara stood, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "I'd like to speak on the defendant's behalf." The judge frowned. "And you are?" "Clara Hutchinson. I know Mr. Kane, know his character. This is highly irregular. Please, Your Honor." "A man's life is at stake." After a moment's consideration, the judge nodded. "Make it brief. Mrs. Hutchinson." Clara made her way to the front, feeling every eye in the room on her. She passed Tom Garrett, saw his smirk, his certainty that nothing she could say would matter. Good. Overconfidence made men careless. "I've known hardship," Clara began, addressing the packed courtroom. "Known what it's like to live with violence, to expect pain instead of kindness. My late husband was not a good man. He died the way he lived, drunk and violent." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Admitting to a bad marriage was almost as scandalous as having one. "When I met Elias Kane, Josiah Kane, I expected more of the same. A dangerous man with blood on his hands. And yes, he's done terrible things. He doesn't deny his past." Clara looked at Elias, saw the warning in his eyes, ignored it. "But I also found a man haunted by his mistakes. A man who tried to change, to be better. A man who loved Rebecca Garrett with a purity that her brother could never understand." "How dare you?" Tom Garrett shot to his feet. "You didn't know my sister." "No," Clara agreed calmly. "But I know what it's like to be trapped by a violent father, to dream of escape, to reach for love wherever you can find it, even if the world says it's wrong." She pulled out a packet of letters. "These are correspondence between Rebecca and a friend. They tell a different story than Mr. Garrett's, a story of a young woman planning to escape an abusive home, of a father who saw his daughter as property to be sold to the highest bidder, of a brother who... Those are private family matters." Tom's face had gone red. "They have nothing to do with murder?" Clara turned to face him fully. "Tell me, Mr. Garrett, where exactly were you when the fire started?" "I've already testified. I was at a poker game." "Yes, with 4 men who owed you money." "Convenient alibi." Clara took a step closer. "But Mary Sullivan saw you at the house that night." The courtroom erupted. Tom went white, then purple. "That's a lie. No one saw—" He caught himself, but too late. "Saw what, Mr. Garrett?" Marshall Thorne stood from his seat in the gallery. "What didn't anyone see?" "I meant, she's lying. This woman is obviously disturbed, taking up with a killer." "Then let's hear from Mary herself," Clara said. Mary Sullivan rose from where she'd been sitting in the back, veiled and hidden. As she made her way forward, Tom's composure cracked. "You can't believe her. I'll ruin her father. "You'll what?" Judge Harrison's voice was sharp. "Are you threatening a witness in my courtroom, Mr. Garrett?" Mary took the stand and told her story, voice shaking but clear. The argument she'd overheard between Tom and his father about money. Tom's drunken arrival home. The lamp in his hand as he stormed inside, raging about his sister's shame. The smoke that followed, and Tom running out alone while his family screamed inside. "You're lying!" Tom lunged toward the witness stand. "I'll kill you! You lying!" It took 3 men to restrain him. In his rage, the mask finally slipped, and everyone saw what Clara had seen. Not a grieving son, but a man capable of murdering his own family for money. "I think," Judge Harrison said slowly, "we need to re-examine this case. Marshal Thorne, please take Mr. Garrett into custody pending investigation. No! Tom fought against the hands holding him. He's the killer. Kane corrupted my sister. He ruined everything. They all deserved what they got, choosing him over family, over me. He seemed to realize what he'd said, but it was too late. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the marshal led him away. Judge Harrison looked at Elias. Mr. Kane, while your past is troubling, it appears you've been falsely accused in this matter. Without evidence directly linking you to the fire, and with new testimony suggesting another perpetrator, I have no choice but to dismiss these charges. The gavel came down like thunder. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief, but Elias didn't look relieved. He looked devastated, staring at his hands as if they still held Rebecca's ashes. Clara went to him, ignoring the crowd, the whispers, everything but the broken man in front of her. It's over, she said softly. No, his voice was rough. It'll never be over. She's still dead. They all are, and I couldn't save them. That's not your fault. I should have stayed away from her. Should have been stronger. Stop! Clara gripped his hands, scarred palm to scarred palm. You loved her. She loved you. In a world full of ugliness, that's not something to be ashamed of. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Neither of us deserves the pain we've carried. But maybe we deserve a chance at something better. They left the courthouse together, pushing through the crowd of gawkers and gossips. Clara heard someone say, "Two of a kind, those two broken people finding each other." Yes, Clara thought, exactly that. They returned to the cabin. Elias had nowhere else to go, and Clara found she didn't want to be anywhere else. The place felt different now, no longer a prison, but a refuge. They worked in comfortable silence, Clara organizing supplies while Elias repaired the damage from the gunfight. As evening fell, they found themselves where it had all started, sitting by the fire, sharing a simple meal. But everything had changed. The walls between them had crumbled, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. "I need to tell you about Samuel," Elias said suddenly. Clara waited, sensing this was something he needed to say. He was the good one, smart, kind, everything I wasn't. When our mother remarried, her new husband saw me as competition, a threat, beat me regular, trying to drive me off. But Samuel, he was small, gentle. The bastard mostly left him alone. Elias stared into the flames. I ran when I was 15. Told myself I'd come back for Samuel when I could take care of him. But I got caught up with the Coltons, and years passed, and I kept telling myself soon. His voice broke. By the time I went back, it was too late. The drinking had gotten worse. The beatings had gotten worse. And Samuel, trying to protect our mother, he killed him. Clara said softly. It wasn't a question. Beat him to death with a poker iron. I found out at his funeral. My mother wouldn't even look at me. Said if I'd been there, if I'd protected him like a brother should. Elias covered his face. She was right. She was grieving. People say terrible things in grief. Doesn't make them less true. He looked at her, eyes full of old pain. That's why I couldn't let another person I cared about die because of my choices. But Rebecca, I failed her too. Clara moved closer, taking his face in her hands. You are not responsible for other people's evil, not your stepfather's, not Tom Garrett's. You've punished yourself enough. How do you do it? He asked. How do you let go of the guilt? I don't know that you ever let it go completely, but you learn to carry it without letting it bury you. She thought of Jake, of all the times she'd blamed herself for his violence. You find reasons to keep living. You find people who see you as more than your worst moments. Is that what we are to each other? Reasons to keep living. Among other things. Clara let her thumb trace the line of his jaw. I was ready to give up. You know, after Jake died, thought I'd used up all my chances at happiness. Then I met a wounded wolf of a man who showed me gentleness could exist even in the harshest places. Elias caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. I love you, Clara. God help me. I shouldn't, but I do. Why shouldn't you? Because I'm selfish. Because instead of sending you away, keeping you safe, I want to keep you here. Want to build something with you, even though I have no right." Clara silenced him with a kiss. When they broke apart, she was crying and laughing at the same time. "You impossible man. Haven't you figured it out yet? We save each other. That's what love is." They made love that night with a desperate tenderness, mapping each other's scars in the firelight. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow. Later, as they lay entwined, Elias traced patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I want to marry you, properly, in a church, with you in a white dress and flowers in your hair." He smiled at her surprised expression. "I want to give you everything you should have had the first time. Everything you deserve. I know you don't need it, but I need to give it to you. Need to do something right for once in my life." Clara kissed him softly. "Then yes, though I should warn you, I'm not very good at being a wife. Ask anyone in Rawhide Pass. I'm not very good at being a husband. Never tried it before." "Then we'll learn together." They talked through the night, making plans. Elias had money saved, enough to buy supplies for the winter and materials to expand the cabin. Come spring, they could run a few cattle, maybe horses. It wouldn't be easy. Elias would always carry the stigma of his past, and Clara would always be the woman who chose him despite it. But it would be theirs. "No more running," Elias said as dawn broke. "No more looking over my shoulder. Just life with you. Think you can handle that? A normal, quiet life. With you, I can handle anything." Clara smiled, feeling peace settle into her bones for the first time in longer than she could remember. They'd both been broken, both been scarred by life's cruelties. But maybe that's what made them fit together so well. Two damaged souls who understood that sometimes love wasn't about finding someone perfect. Sometimes it was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. "I should check your wound," she said, noticing him favoring his shoulder. "It's fine, mostly healed." "Let me see." He sighed but submitted to her examination. The bullet wound had indeed healed well, leaving another scar to add to his collection. Clara pressed her lips to it gently. "What are you doing? Blessing your scars?" she said simply. "All of them, because they're part of you, and I love all of you." Elias pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "How did I get so lucky?" "Not luck," Clara said. "Just two people stubborn enough to hold on when letting go would have been easier." As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, they stood together in the doorway of the cabin. The landscape that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when Clara first arrived now felt like home. "What happens now?" Elias asked. Clara took his hand, scarred palm to scarred palm. Now we live." And despite everything, the pain, the loss, the long roads that had brought them here, that seemed like the greatest adventure of all. The riders came at dusk 3 weeks later, their silhouettes dark against the dying light. Clara saw them first from the window where she was mending one of Elias's shirts. Her blood ran cold at the sight. 5 men, armed, moving with the purposeful pace of hunters who'd cornered their prey. "Elias," she called softly, not wanting to alarm him but needing him to know. He was at the window in 2 strides, his body tensing as he recognized the lead rider. "Colton's men," he said grimly. "I wondered when they'd come. I thought the gang was broken up, most of them hanged. Most, not all." Elias was already checking his rifle, his movements efficient but somehow resigned. "Jack Colton's younger brother Wade survived. Looks like he's rebuilt what was left." He met her eyes. "They're not here for money. Clara, this is about revenge. I walked away from the gang, and in their world, that's betrayal." "Then we fight," Clara said, reaching for the pistol he'd taught her to use. "No!" His voice was sharp. "You're getting out. Now. Take the horse. Ride for town." "We've had this conversation before." Clara interrupted. "I'm not leaving you." "Clara, please." "Would you leave me?" He stared at her, jaw working, then cursed under his breath. Stubborn woman. That's why you love me. Despite the danger, she managed a small smile. Tell me what to do. They worked quickly, barricading the door, checking ammunition, positioning themselves at defensible points. Through it all, Clara marveled at how calm she felt. Perhaps facing death beside someone you loved was easier than facing life alone. Josiah Kane! The voice from outside was young, harsh with barely controlled rage. Wade Colton wants a word. Tell Wade he knows where to find me, Elias called back. He doesn't need 5 men for a conversation. Oh, this ain't gonna be much of a conversation, the speaker laughed. You killed my brother, Kane. Shot him in the back like the coward you are. Your brother was fixing to shoot a bank teller who was all of 16 years old, Elias replied. I gave him a choice. He made the wrong one. Don't matter. Blood for blood. That's the code. Clara peered through a gap in the shutters. The men had spread out, taking cover behind rocks and trees. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. Send out your woman, Kane, another voice called. This ain't her quarrel. We let her ride out. No harm done. You must think I'm stupid, Elias muttered. Then louder. Anyone touches her, I'll kill you twice as slow as I killed Ben. Have it your way. The first shots shattered the evening quiet, splintering wood and shattering what remained of the window glass. Clara pressed herself against the wall, returning fire when she could, trying not to think about how outnumbered they were. How many bullets do we have? She asked during a lull. Not enough, Elias admitted. But maybe. He broke off as shots erupted from a new direction. Not at the cabin, at the attackers. What the hell? One of Colton's men yelped as a bullet kicked up dirt near his position. Clara risked a look and gasped. There are riders coming up the trail. A lot of them. Elias joined her at the window, then smiled. Actually smiled. I'll be damned. Who are they? Looks like Marshall Thorne. And if I'm not mistaken, that's Mrs. Garrett beside him. Indeed, the boarding house owner sat a horse like she was born to it, a shotgun across her saddle. Behind them rode at least a dozen men from town, all armed. Wade Colton, Marshall Thorne's voice carried clearly. This is federal business now. Drop your weapons. This ain't your fight. Marshall, Wade called back. But Clara could hear uncertainty now. You made it my fight when you rode into my jurisdiction looking for violence. The marshal's tone brooked no argument. You've got 2 choices. Son, ride out now. Or stay permanent in our cemetery. Makes no difference to me. For a moment, the standoff held. Then one of Colton's men broke, spurring his horse back down the trail. The others followed. Wade Colton last. But not before shouting a final threat. This ain't over, Kane. You can't hide behind lawmen forever. As the outlaws disappeared into the gathering darkness, the marshal and his posse approached the cabin. Clara and Elias emerged cautiously, still hardly believing their reprieve. Marshal, Elias said, nodding. That was good timing. Wasn't timing. Thorne replied, Mrs. Garrett here insisted we keep an eye on you 2, said she had a feeling trouble was coming. The boarding house owner dismounted with surprising agility for her age. Clara Hutchinson, she said sternly. You're a damn fool, throwing your lot in with this man. I know, Clara said simply. Good. Self-awareness is important. The older woman's expression softened. My son Tom was a monster. Had been since he was young, though I tried not to see it, when I heard what he'd done to his own family. She shook her head. I owed you both for revealing the truth, painful as it was. You don't owe us anything, Elias said quietly. I do, and I pay my debts. Mrs. Garrett looked between them. You planning on staying in this godforsaken cabin? It's home, Clara said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Then you'll need supplies for winter, and neighbors who'll watch your back. She gestured to the men behind her. These folks might not all approve of your choices, but they believe in justice. They'll give you a chance. One by one, the townsmen nodded or touched their hat brims. Not friendly, exactly, but not hostile either. It was more than Clara had dared hope for. Wade Colton won't give up, Marshal Thorne warned. Men like him never do. I know, Elias said, but I'm done running. Whatever comes, we'll face it here. The marshal studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Then you'll face it with the law on your side. About time you had that experience. After the riders left, promising to check in regularly, Clara and Elias stood in their bullet-riddled cabin, assessing the damage. We'll need new windows before snow, Clara said practically, and a new door. Maybe reinforce the walls while we're at it. Elias wrapped his arms around her from behind. I'm sorry, Clara. This is my past coming to call. You shouldn't have to. She turned in his arms, silencing him with a finger to his lips. Our past, our future, for better or worse. Remember? We're not married yet, he pointed out. Details, she said, and kissed him. They spent the next days repairing the damage, working side by side in companionable rhythm. True to Mrs. Garrett's word, supplies arrived from town, not just basics, but small luxuries too. Real coffee, white flour, even a precious pane of window glass wrapped carefully in burlap. Some visitors were less welcome. Wade Colton's men were spotted several times, watching from a distance but coming no closer. The marshal had made good on his threat. The cabin was checked on daily by rotating townsmen, making it clear that any attack would be met with force. He's waiting, Elias said one evening, cleaning his rifle for the third time that day, waiting for them to get comfortable, to let their guard down. Then he'll wait a long time. Clara replied, This town might not love us, but they hate being pushed around by outlaws more. Still, the constant vigilance wore on them. Clara jumped at shadows, and Elias barely slept. Sitting up with his rifle across his knees, the peace they'd found in each other felt fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. It was Clara who finally had enough. This is no way to live, she announced one morning, watching Elias pace the cabin like a caged wolf, waiting for someone else to decide our fate. What choice do we have? I can't call Wade out. That would be murder, and leaving would just put others in danger when he followed. Clara considered this, then smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. What if we didn't wait? What if we gave him what he wants? Clara, no, whatever you're thinking, hear me out. She leaned forward, eyes bright with determination. Wade wants revenge for his brother. A fair fight, honor satisfied. What if we give him that chance? He wouldn't fight fair. None of them would. No, Clara agreed. But what if the whole town was watching? What if running or cheating would destroy any reputation he has left? Elias stared at her. You're talking about a formal challenge. A duel. It's legal, if done properly. Marshal Thorne would have to oversee it. Clara took his hands. One fight, witnesses all around, and either way it ends. Either Wade gets his revenge, or he has to accept the outcome and leave us be. And if I lose? Clara's grip tightened. You won't. You have a lot of faith in a broken-down outlaw. I have faith in the man who taught me to shoot, who protected me even with a bullet wound, who chose love over violence even when violence was easier. She touched his face. You're not the same man who rode with the Coltons, Elias. You're stronger now, and you're not alone. He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. How did I find you? You didn't. I found you, remember? Bleeding and stubborn in this very cabin. Clara smiled. Now, let's go talk to the marshal about ending this properly. The challenge was issued through proper channels. Marshal Thorne didn't like it, but couldn't find legal grounds to prevent it. Wade Colton accepted immediately, as they'd known he would. The duel was set for 1 week hence, at dawn, in the field behind the church. Pistols. Wade had specified, since that's how you killed Ben, seems fitting. The town was divided. Some felt Elias was foolish to give Wade a fair chance. Others admired his courage in facing his past head-on. Bets were placed, though Clara tried not to hear the odds. The night before the duel, she found Elias sitting outside, watching the stars. Scared? She asked, settling beside him. Terrified, he admitted. Not of dying, of leaving you alone. Then don't. She leaned against his shoulder. It's that simple. Nothing's ever that simple. Sometimes it is. Clara pointed at the sky. Those stars don't care about our troubles. They'll shine tomorrow whether you win or lose. But I care, and I'll be really angry if you die on me. Despite everything, he chuckled. Can't have that. No, you can't. She turned to face him. Promise me something. Anything. Whatever happens tomorrow, no regrets. We found each other against all odds. We've had these weeks of peace, of love. That's more than many get in a lifetime. It's not enough, Elias said fiercely. I want years with you. Decades. I want to see your hair go gray and complain about my creaking bones. Clara kissed him, pouring all her love and fear and hope into the contact. When they broke apart, both were trembling. Then fight for that, she whispered. Fight for us. Dawn came too soon, pale and cold. The field behind the church was crowded with spectators, their breath misting in the chill air. Clara stood with Mrs. Garrett, who'd come to offer support. He's a good shot, the older woman murmured. Saw him practice yesterday. Elias is better, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. Wade Colton stood at the far end of the field, young and full of rage. He had his brother's eyes, cold and cruel. 3 of his men flanked him, hands near their weapons despite the marshal's warning about interference. Elias stood alone until Clara broke from the crowd to embrace him one last time. Remember, she whispered, you're fighting for our future. He's fighting for the past. The future always wins. I love you, he said simply. I know. Now go show them who you really are. Marshal Thorne explained the rules. 10 paces, turn and fire. 1 shot each. If both men survived, the matter would be considered settled. They took their positions back to back. Clara's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. 1. The marshal counted. 2. Each number felt like a year. Clara watched Elias walk, steady and sure. No trace of the wounded man she'd first met. 8, 9, 10, turn and fire. The shots rang out almost simultaneously. For a moment, both men stood frozen. Then Wade Colton crumpled, clutching his shoulder, gun falling from nerveless fingers. Elias remained standing, a thin line of blood on his cheek where Wade's bullet had grazed him. It's finished, Marshal Thorne announced. Mr. Kane has won fairly. This matter is settled. Wade's men rushed to their leader, helping him stand. He glared at Elias with undiminished hatred. This ain't over, he snarled. Yes, it is, Elias said quietly. Your brother chose his path. You chose yours. I've chosen mine. Let it end. Wade, find something better to live for than revenge. For a moment, something flickered in the young man's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even recognition. Then his men were leading him away, and the crowd was dispersing, and Clara was in Elias's arms, both of them shaking with relief. You did it, she breathed. We did it, he corrected. I couldn't have faced him without you. Mrs. Garrett approached, approval clear on her weathered face. Well done, Mr. Kane. You've given this town something to think about. Proof that a man can change, can choose a different path. She looked at Clara. Both of you have. As they walked back to their cabin, their home, Clara felt something shift in the air. The townspeople nodded as they passed, some even managing small smiles. They weren't fully accepted yet. Might never be. But they were no longer outsiders, no longer just the widow and the outlaw. They were Clara and Elias, building a life together against all odds. And that, Clara thought, as Elias took her hand, was enough to start with. The rest would come with time. So, Elias said as they reached their door. What now? Clara pretended to consider. Now? Now we fix the windows. Winter's coming, and I'm not freezing because you had to go and be noble. He laughed, the sound free and clear in the morning air. Practical as always. Someone has to be. She pulled him inside, into the warmth and safety of their home. But first, let me tend that graze. Can't have you bleeding all over our clean floors. as she cleaned the small wound. Gentle as always. Elias caught her hand. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Today. Tomorrow. As soon as the preacher can say the words." Clara smiled, her heart so full it might burst. "Are you sure? No more doubts about deserving happiness?" "No more doubts," he confirmed. "Wade was right about one thing. Life's too uncertain to waste time. I want you to be my wife. Clara, want everyone to know that the luckiest day of my life was when you walked through that door." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, to today. Tomorrow. Forever." They kissed, sealing the promise, while outside their patched windows. The sun rose fully over the mountains. The past would always be with them. Their scars testified to that. But the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And for two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness, that was miracle enough. The winter settled over Wyoming like a heavy blanket, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle under its covering of white. 3 months had passed since the duel. 3 months since Clara and Elias had spoken their vows in the small church with Mrs. Garrett and Marshall Thorne as witnesses. 3 months of building a life together, of learning each other's rhythms, of finding peace in the quiet moments between survival and hope. But as Clara watched Elias through the frosted window, she saw the shadows gathering in him again. He stood at the edge of the cliff behind their cabin, a dark figure against the snow, still as the rocks around him. She'd woken to find his side of the bed empty and cold. It wasn't the first time. The nightmares had returned with the winter darkness, and with them, a melancholy that seemed to seep into Elias like the cold through the cabin walls. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside. The snow crunched under her boots, announcing her presence. But Elias didn't turn. "You'll freeze out here," she said softly. "Sometimes I think that would be fitting." His voice was hollow, distant. "The cold preserves things, keeps them from rotting. Maybe if I stay out here long enough, I'll stop corrupting everything I touch." "Elias, do you know what day it is?" He still wouldn't look at her. 3 years ago today, Rebecca died. 3 years, and I can still hear her screaming in the fire. Still smell the smoke. Clara moved closer but didn't touch him. She'd learned when to offer comfort and when to simply be present. "And Samuel would have been 25 next month," Elias continued. "Would have been married by now, probably teaching school somewhere, making their mother proud. Instead, he's in the ground because I was too much of a coward to face our stepfather. You were a child yourself," Clara said gently, 15 years old and already bearing scars. "Don't!" He finally turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her breath catch. "Don't make excuses for me. Clara, I've killed men, not just in self-defense, but because I was angry or scared or paid to do it. I've stolen from people who had little to begin with. I know who you were," Clara interrupted. "And I know who you are now. They're not the same man." "Aren't they?" Elias laughed bitterly. "I still reach for my gun when I hear horses. Still check every corner, every shadow. What kind of life is that for you? Married to a man who jumps at his own memories?" Clara studied him, this man she'd chosen, seeing all his broken pieces in the harsh morning light. Then she made a decision. "Come with me," she said, taking his hand. "Clara, trust me." She led him back to the cabin, but instead of going inside, she went to the lean-to where they kept their tools, from behind a pile of lumber. She pulled out something wrapped in burlap. "I've been waiting for the right time," she said, handing it to him. "Maybe there's no such thing as the right time. Maybe there's just now." Elias unwrapped the bundle slowly, then stared at what lay within. It was wood, beautifully grained pine, along with carving tools that gleamed despite their age. "Where did you get these?" "Mrs. Garrett helped me order them from Denver. She remembered you mentioning that your brother liked to carve, that he'd tried to teach you once." Clara watched his face carefully. "I thought maybe it was time to learn." Elias ran his fingers over the tools, and Clara saw his hand tremble. "I don't remember how. Samuel tried to show me, but I was too impatient, too eager to be anywhere but sitting still. Then we'll learn together, Clara said simply, one cut at a time. They spent the morning at the table, Clara watching as Elias tentatively took up the tools. His first attempts were clumsy, uncertain, but gradually his hands seemed to remember motions learned long ago. As he worked, he talked about Samuel's patience, his clever fingers that could coax beauty from raw wood, his dreams of making furniture for the schoolhouse he'd one day teach in. He made our mother a jewelry box once, Elias said, smiling at the memory. Carved with roses because that was her name, Rose. She cried when he gave it to her. Happy tears, she said, though I didn't understand the difference then. What happened to it? Burned with everything else when I torched our stepfather's house. The admission came quietly, matter-of-factly. After Samuel's funeral. After Mother turned me away, I waited until they were gone. Then set it all ablaze. Thought if I destroyed the place where so much pain had lived, maybe it would stop hurting. Clara covered his hand with hers, stilling the knife. Did it? No, just added more guilt to carry. He looked at her. I've never told anyone that. About the fire. Even the Coltons didn't know. Your secret's safe with me. Clara said, all of them are. They worked in companionable silence after that, Elias carving while Clara prepared their midday meal. When she glanced at him, she saw something had shifted in his posture. The crushing weight hadn't lifted entirely, but it seemed more bearable somehow. After they ate, Elias surprised her by speaking again. I used to think about it, when things were at their worst. Finding a cliff like that one and just letting go seemed easier than carrying all the ghosts. Clara's hands stilled on the dishes, but she kept her voice steady. What stopped you? Different things at different times. Stubbornness. Mostly spite. Sometimes refusing to give my enemies the satisfaction. He paused. And then I met you, and for the first time in years, I had a reason that wasn't about what I was running from, but what I might be running toward. Elias, let me finish. He set down the carving knife, turning to face her fully. I need you to know something. Clara, the darkness in me, it's not going away. There will be other mornings when I stand on that cliff edge. Other nights when the ghosts are louder than your heartbeat beside me. I'll try to push you away. Try to convince you that you deserve better, because you do. You deserve a man who doesn't wake up screaming, who doesn't check every window before he can relax, who doesn't carry enough blood on his hands to fill a river. But, Clara prompted when he fell silent, but I'm selfish enough to hold on anyway, to take what happiness you offer even though I know I'm stealing it from the life you could have had with someone whole. His voice broke. God help me. Clara, I'm not strong enough to let you go. Clara moved to him then, taking his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Listen to me, Elias Kane. You're not stealing anything. Every moment with you is a choice I make freely, gladly. You think you're broken? So am I. You think you don't deserve love? Neither did I. But here we are, two damaged people who found something worth fighting for in each other. I could hurt you, he whispered. Not meaning to, but the darkness. You could, Clara agreed. Just like I could hurt you. Love is risk. Elias. But I'd rather risk everything with you than be safe and alone. He pulled her close then, burying his face in her hair, and she felt him shudder with suppressed sobs. She held him through it. This strong man who'd survived so much finally allowing himself to break in the safety of her arms. When the storm passed, they were both wrung out but somehow cleaner for it. Elias pulled back enough to look at her, wonder in his red-rimmed eyes. How do you do it? How do you see past all the ugliness to find something worth saving? Because I know what it's like to believe you're beyond saving, Clara said simply. Jake told me every day that I was worthless, that no one else would want me, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection he threw my way. I believed him for 7 years. And then I met a wounded outlaw who looked at me like I was precious, who taught me to defend myself, not to control me, but to free me, who chose gentleness even when violence would have been easier. "Clara, we save each other," she said firmly. "That's what love is. Not perfect people finding each other, but imperfect people choosing each other anyway." That night, as a blizzard howled outside their reinforced walls, they made love with a desperate tenderness that spoke of mortality, acknowledged and defied. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Elias traced patterns on Clara's skin, letters, she realized, words written on her body like prayers. "What are you writing?" she asked drowsily. "Promises," he murmured. "All the things I want to give you, all the years I want to share." "Tell me." So he did, painting futures on her skin with his fingertips. A garden come spring, rows of vegetables and herbs. A larger cabin with a proper bedroom and a kitchen big enough to cook for company. Children, maybe, if they were so blessed. Little ones with Clara's strength and his stubbornness. Quiet evenings by the fire. Loud arguments over nothing important. Lazy Sunday mornings when the world couldn't intrude. "And when we're old?" Clara asked, caught up in the vision. "When we're old, I'll still look at you and see the woman who walked into my life when I'd given up on it, who saw my scars and called them beautiful, who stood beside me when men came to kill me." His voice roughened. "I'll love you until my last breath, Clara Kane, and probably beyond. If such things are possible." "They are," Clara said with certainty. "Love like this doesn't end with death. It just changes form." They fell asleep wrapped around each other. The storm outside no match for the warmth within. And when Elias woke in the gray pre-dawn, for once it wasn't from nightmares, but from the simple need to watch his wife sleep in the growing light. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake her, and went to the table where his carving waited. As the sun broke through the storm clouds, painting their cabin in shades of gold and pink, he took up the knife and began to work. Not aimlessly now, but with purpose. He was carving a jewelry box, simple, imperfect, but made with love. And on the lid, he carved roses, not for his mother this time, but for his wife, for Clara, who'd taught him that some flowers could bloom even in the harshest ground. When Clara woke and saw what he was making, she smiled through her tears. "It's beautiful." "It's just a beginning," Elias said, not stopping his work. "I've got a lot of lost time to make up for, a lot of beauty to try to balance against the ugliness." "We've got time," Clara said, coming to stand behind him, arms wrapped around his shoulders. "All the time we need." Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the snow from their roof in steady drips. Spring was still months away, but somehow, in the warmth of their cabin, it had already begun. The jewelry box would be the first of many things Elias carved that winter. Some he sold in town, earning surprised respect from people who'd only known him as a gunman. Others he gave away. Toys for the children who were brave enough to approach him. A walking stick for an old man who'd defended him to gossips. But the box remained on Clara's dresser, holding her few precious things, her mother's ring, a dried flower from their wedding, the bullet the doctor had dug from her shoulder, reminders that beauty and pain often came intertwined, that survival itself could be an act of creation. And sometimes, late at night when the ghosts grew loud, Elias would hold that box, running his fingers over the roses he'd carved, reminding himself that hands that had destroyed could also create, that men who'd lost their way could sometimes find it again, that love, imperfect and struggling and fierce, could be enough to keep the darkness at bay. One morning near winter's end, Clara found Elias at the cliff edge again. But this time, he was carving, a small figure taking shape in his hands as he worked. "What are you making?" she asked, settling beside him on the cold stone. "A guardian," he said, showing her the emerging form of an angel. "Thought I'd leave it here, where I've stood so many mornings thinking about jumping. A reminder." "Of what?" He looked at her, and his smile was sad but real. "That someone thinks I'm worth guarding, that falling isn't the only choice." He went back to his carving. "Maybe someone else will find it someday. Someone else standing on the edge. Maybe it'll help them step back." Clara leaned against his shoulder, watching him work. "Samuel would be proud of you." "Maybe." Elias's hands stilled for a moment. I hope so. I hope wherever he is, he knows I'm trying, that I'm finally learning what he tried to teach me all those years ago. He knows, Clara said with quiet certainty. Love like his doesn't die. It just waits for us to be ready to feel it again. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, artist and witness, husband and wife. Two souls who'd found their way to each other through violence and into something approaching peace. The angel took shape between them, imperfect but sincere. Scarred hands creating beauty from raw wood and hard-won hope. When it was finished, Elias wedged it carefully into a crevice in the rocks, positioned where anyone standing at the cliff's edge would see it. A silent testimony that there were other choices, other chances, other mornings waiting beyond the darkness. Ready to go home? Clara asked. Elias took her hand, calloused palm against calloused palm. I'm already there. They walked back to their cabin together, leaving the guardian angel to keep its vigil. And if sometimes the darkness still called to him, if sometimes the ghosts still whispered, there was also this, a woman who loved him, work for his hands, and the knowledge that broken things could sometimes be remade into something beautiful. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Those were for people whose stories hadn't been written in scar tissue and survival, but it was theirs, earned in blood and tears and the daily choice to keep living, keep loving, keep believing that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. And for two people who'd once believed they were beyond saving, that was miracle enough. Spring came to Wyoming like a cautious visitor, testing the ground with warm days before retreating into cold nights. Clara stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Behind her, she could hear Elias preparing breakfast, a simple melody of routine that still made her heart swell with quiet joy. 8 months had passed since their wedding, and the town of Rawhide Pass had slowly, grudgingly, begun to accept them. Not with open arms, perhaps, but with small nods of acknowledgement, occasional words of greeting, even the rare invitation to Sunday dinner. It was more than either had dared hope for. Festival committee's meeting today, Elias said, joining her in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Mrs. Garrett asked if we'd help with the preparations. Clara smiled at the careful neutrality in his voice. The spring festival was the town's biggest celebration, and being asked to help was no small thing. What did you tell her? That I'd ask my wife. He handed her the coffee, their fingers brushing in a familiar caress. What do you think? Ready to be proper townsfolk? Before Clara could answer, they spotted a rider approaching on the trail. Both tensed, old habits died hard, but relaxed as they recognized Marshal Thorne's distinctive bay mare. The marshal dismounted with his usual economy of movement, but Clara caught something different in his expression, a softness around the eyes, perhaps even approval. Morning, folks, he said, touching his hat brim. Sorry to intrude so early, but I've got news I thought you should hear. Wade Colton's dead. Clara felt Elias go still beside her. How? Tried to rob a bank down in Colorado. Local sheriff wasn't as forgiving as I was. Thorne studied Elias carefully. His men scattered after that? Gang's finished for good this time. I see. Elias's voice was steady, but Clara could feel the tremor that ran through him. Another ghost laid to rest, another chain to the past broken. There's more, the marshal continued. Found some papers in Wade's effects. Seems he'd been keeping track of you, planning something for after winter. You were right to be watchful. But that's over now, Clara said, reaching for Elias's hand. It is, Thorne agreed. Figured you deserved to know. Man ought to be able to sleep peacefully in his own home. After the marshal left, Elias stood silent for a long moment, staring at the mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. It's really over, all of it, the Coltons, the running, the looking over my shoulder. He turned to Clara, wonder in his eyes. I'm free. You've been free since the day you chose love over fear. Clara said softly, this just makes it official. That afternoon, They went to town together for the festival committee meeting. The schoolhouse was crowded with familiar faces, and Clara noticed how the conversations didn't stop when they entered. They were no longer curiosities or threats. They were simply Elias and Clara Kane, neighbors with their own troubles and triumphs. Clara, Sarah Morrison, the baker's wife, waved them over. "I was hoping you'd come. We need someone to organize the shooting contest, and well," she glanced at Elias meaningfully, "seems like you'd be the perfect choice." "I don't know if that's wise," Elias began, but old Samuel Hendricks interrupted. "Nonsense, son. You're the best shot in 3 counties, and you've proven you can be trusted. Besides," the old man's eyes twinkled, "might be good for some of our young bucks to learn there's more to handling a gun than just pointing and shooting." As the meeting progressed, Clara watched her husband slowly relax into the role they were offering him, not the reformed outlaw held at arm's length, but a valued member of the community. When someone mentioned needing new targets for the contest, Elias quietly offered to carve them, earning surprised and pleased murmurs. Walking home afterward, arms full of festival plans and donated supplies, Clara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. "Look at us," she said, laughing. "Proper townspeople planning social events. What would the old Clara and Elias think? That we'd lost our minds?" Elias replied, but he was smiling. "Or found them. Maybe." That night, as they reviewed their responsibilities for the festival, a knock came at the door. They exchanged glances. Evening visitors were still rare, and Elias automatically checked his pistol before answering. A young woman stood on their doorstep, travel-worn and nervous. She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair and familiar gray eyes that made Elias catch his breath. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, voice trembling. "But are you Josiah Kane?" "I was," Elias said carefully. "Who's asking?" "My name is Grace Willows now, but I was Grace Sullivan, Samuel's sweetheart, before—" She swallowed hard. "Before he died." Clara saw Elias sway slightly and quickly moved to support him. "Please, come in," she said gently. "You've traveled far." "From Missouri. I've been trying to find Josiah for years. Samuel used to talk about him all the time. His brave older brother who was going to come back for him someday." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I wanted him to know that Samuel never blamed him, never stopped loving him." Elias sank into a chair as if his legs could no longer hold him. "You knew my brother?" "We were planning to marry," Grace said softly. "He'd saved enough to buy a small piece of land, was going to build us a house. He talked about you constantly, how smart you were, how you could shoot anything, how you were going to be so proud when you saw what he'd made of himself. But I wasn't there," Elias whispered. "When he needed me most, I wasn't there." "No," Grace agreed, and her honesty was somehow kinder than false comfort. "But he understood why. He knew what your stepfather was like, knew why you had to leave." She reached into her bag, pulling out a small wooden box. "He made this for you. Was going to give it to you when you came back," with shaking hands. Elias took the box. It was beautifully carved with images of horses running free across open plains. Inside was a folded paper and a small carved figure, a boy teaching another boy, their faces peaceful and concentrated. "He said that was his favorite memory," Grace explained. "You letting him teach you something for once, even though you were older, said it made him feel important." Elias unfolded the paper, and Clara read over his shoulder, in careful script. Samuel had written, "For my brother Josiah, may you run as free as these horses someday. May you find peace. May you remember that you are loved, always. Your brother, Samuel." The sob that tore from Elias's throat was raw, primal. Clara held him as he wept, years of grief and guilt pouring out in the presence of someone who'd loved Samuel too. Grace cried with them, 3 souls bound by loss and unexpected grace. When the storm of emotion passed, they sat by the fire, sharing stories of Samuel. Grace told them about his patience with struggling students, his gentle humor, his dreams of children who'd call Josiah Uncle. Elias shared memories of teaching Samuel to ride, of protecting him from their stepfather's rages, of the little brother who'd followed him everywhere with hero worship in his eyes. "He never stopped believing you'd come back," Grace said as the fire burned low. "Even at the end, he told me to find you if I could, to tell you he loved you." "Why now?" Clara asked gently. "After all these years?" Grace smiled sadly. "I was married for a time, a good man, but he died last winter. No children to keep me in Missouri, and I realized I'd promised Samuel. It was time to keep that promise." They talked until dawn, and when Grace prepared to leave, Elias stopped her. "Stay for the festival," he said. "Please, Samuel would want—" "He'd want you to see that I finally found what he wished for me. Peace, love, a place to belong." Grace stayed, and her presence seemed to complete something in Elias. At the spring festival, she watched with tears in her eyes as he ran the shooting contest with patience and good humor, teaching young boys the same careful lessons he'd once taught Samuel. She saw Clara working beside him, saw the gentle touches and shared smiles that spoke of deep love. She saw a community that had accepted a broken man and helped him heal. "He would be so proud," Grace whispered to Clara as they watched Elias help a young boy adjust his stance. So happy that his brother found this. The festival was a success, with Elias's carved targets becoming prized souvenirs and Clara's organization making everything run smoothly. But the real triumph was smaller, quieter, the moment when old Hendricks clapped Elias on the back and said, "Fine job, son. We'll be counting on you next year, too." That evening, as the celebration wound down, Elias and Clara walked Grace to the stage depot. She was heading west to California, she said, to start fresh where the shadows couldn't follow. "Thank you," Elias said, gripping her hands, "for finding me, for bringing him back to me, in a way. Thank you for becoming the man he always knew you could be," Grace replied. She hugged them both, then climbed aboard the stage. As it pulled away, she leaned out the window, calling back, "Be happy, live well, love deeply." Walking home hand in hand through the spring evening, Clara felt the last of the weight lift from Elias's shoulders. He stood taller, breathed easier, smiled more readily. The ghosts would never fully leave. They both knew that. But they no longer ruled him. "I want to expand the cabin," he said suddenly. "Add proper rooms, maybe." He paused, glancing at her. "Maybe a room for children, if we're blessed." Clara's heart skipped. They'd never spoken of it directly, both too aware of how fragile happiness could be. But now, with the past finally laid to rest and the future spreading before them, "I'd like that," she said simply. They stopped at the cliff edge where Elias had carved his guardian angel. It still stood watch, weathered but intact. Beside it now were other carvings, messages of hope from unknown hands, as if the angel had inspired others to step back from their own edges. "We did that," Clara said wonderingly. "We helped create that." "You did," Elias corrected. "By refusing to let me fall, by showing me there was something worth climbing back for. We saved each other." Clara insisted, echoing words that had become their truth. "And now we live," Elias said, pulling her close. "We build, we hope, we teach our children, God willing, that love is stronger than hate, that people can change, that even the most broken hearts can learn to beat again." As they stood there, the setting sun painting the world in shades of gold and possibility, a thought occurred to Clara. "Do you think they can see us, Samuel and Rebecca? Do you think they know?" Elias was quiet for a moment, then pointed to where the first stars were appearing in the deepening sky. "Samuel always said the stars were God's way of letting us peek into heaven. Said the brightest ones were the people we loved, watching over us." He smiled, and it was peaceful. "I think they know. I think they've been waiting for us to know it too." They stood together until full dark. Two people who'd found each other in violence and built something beautiful from the ashes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Life always did. There would be hard times ahead, struggles and sorrows mixed with the joys. but they would face them together, anchored by a love that had already survived the worst storms life could offer. As they walked back to their cabin, their home, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate widow taking a dangerous job. A wounded outlaw, certain he was beyond redemption. Two broken people who'd somehow made each other whole. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, noting her contemplative mood. "That I'm grateful," Clara said. "For all of it, even the pain, because it led me to you." "Mrs. Kane," Elias said, with the crooked smile she loved. "You're a romantic." "Mr. Kane," she replied. "So are you." They laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like a promise. Behind them, the guardian angel stood its eternal watch, a testament to the power of choosing life, choosing love, choosing to believe that the story doesn't end with our wounds, but with how we heal them. And in their small cabin at the edge of the wilderness, two scarred souls proved that sometimes, against all odds, broken pieces can be reformed into something stronger and more beautiful than what came before. They'd written their love story in bullets and bandages, in tears and laughter, in the thousand small choices that led from darkness into light. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And it was only the beginning. Thank you for listening to this story of Clara and Elias, two wounded souls who found healing in each other's arms in the harsh landscape of the Wild West. If you've stayed with us through their journey, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What touched your heart in their story? Please subscribe to our channel, From Wild West, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's connect across the miles, just as Clara and Elias connected across their pain. Until next time, remember, love can bloom even in the roughest ground.